it's about to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the three things that I focus on is momentum, right? Like basic sales advice, make sure your calendar is full, lead generation, talking to a lot of people. Every conversation energizes you.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of SMB Stars. It's a talk show where I, your host Komal Singh, bring on various small business owners and entrepreneurs. And this is an opportunity for us to hear about their inspiring and raw stories. Today, my guest is Ujjwala Kashkari. Ujjwala, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Komal.
So excited to have you on here. I met Ujjwala at a dinner event in DC and we connected right away. So I'm super excited to bring her on the show and hear about her amazing story. So, Ujjwala, let's kick things off. Why don't you give us, our audience, a quick intro?
Sure. Hey everyone, my name is Ujjwala. I am the co founder of Artilligent. We are a US and India based startup, robotic startup. And there are two key components to our business. So, on one end, we're a robotics research and development lab that leverages off the shelf technologies and platform to build custom and semi-custom robots. And on the other end, we partner with other robotic companies and help them commercialize their robots in new markets. So before I get into, we get further into this conversation, you alluded to the dinner meeting we met at.
Mm-hmm.
And, I wanted to share a really good story there. So this was the Wonder Woman dinner. And I know you and I are both very big believers of like networking, and
Yeah.
we've been in the DC tech space for a very long time, but that was the first time we
Yeah.
met. And I had actually never known of Wonder Woman. I'm kind of curious how you heard of it, but I just had this very random encounter with someone on LinkedIn,
Mm-hmm.
and they
Uh-huh.
recommended I should be go to these events. And it was such a lovely dinner. Our host, I
Yeah.
think there were like more than 20 women
Yeah.
there. It
Yeah.
was a lovely like salmon dinner, sit down dinner, and we were seated next to each other.
Yeah.
So I went to another networking event recently and met with someone, and they said something very nice. And I go to a lot of networking events, and then I just kind of come back and don't think much about it. But they said
Uh-huh.
if you go to a networking event and you meet one person that you connect with and you would like to stay in touch with, it's a
Mm-hmm.
successful event. So
Yes.
I did want to point out that that was a successful event for both of us, I hope.
Yes, yes, no, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it was, it was a good event, and I'm so glad we got a chance to sit next to each other. And it's super exciting what you're building. So let's get and I think I do agree with whoever told you that. Like networking events are typically sometimes very overwhelming because it's just like so many people. But I agree, like if you walk away with one good connection that you have met that night or that evening and you keep in touch, like that's success. Cool. All right, so let's get right into it. Ujjwala, I'm super excited to know how you got into robotics. With AI being all the rage now, it's very exciting to see that you're working on a startup and a startup in the robotics space. So tell me, like, how did you get started with it? Like, what was it? Like, yeah, how did you get into it?
So I actually stumbled into robotics. I have
Hmm.
built a career working for startups. I worked for 7 startups in my entire career.
And this is the first one, which is yours, which you're
This
the
is
co-founder
the
of.
eighth one is my own. So yeah,
Okay.
eighth one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I started working for the Washington Post in DC, which is not a
Hmm.
startup, but we were sort of operating as a startup. We had a living a social Groupon kind of product.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know how long you've been in the DC area, but Living Social
Oh yeah. I remember Living Social.
in many ways was the genesis of like startups in DC, because a lot of
Correct.
like founding team members went on to like start companies. So I was very lucky that that was sort of the beginning of my career.
Hmm.
And having worked and like I networked with a lot of people. So one of my coworkers was working for a company in the Bay Area, and we were having drinks, and she told me that I would this would be a perfect role for me. And I'm like, I'm not entirely sure if I would be able to sell robots. They were at the time planning to get into the educational space. I was working for an ed tech startup. So I had a few conversations with them, and I was very clear that I was not willing to move to the Bay Area. Like, as much as lovely as Silicon Valley is, I wanted to stay in DC. And those conversations progressed well, and that's basically how I got my start. So it really was, just maybe knowing the right people. And robotics was not all the rage like I think it is today, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially with, humanoids being all the
Mm-hmm.
conversation, and of course AI as well. And I had a really successful 4 years with the company. So when I joined, they had completed a sort of Kickstarter campaign and sold over 100 robots. By the time I left, so I was the first salesperson, and by the time I left, we had sold over 4,000 robots in 50 plus countries. So I was
Mm-hmm.
able to, grow the company really well, also scale the team. And the offering was a telepresence robot. So a telepresence robot is basically, an extension of your presence in another location. So simply put, it's a Zoom call on wheels that you can control from anywhere. And that leads itself into a lot of different use cases. So, a data center, which is usually you don't have a lot of humans in a data center. So having a
Got
robot
it.
there could be
Mm-hmm.
helpful. A big applications in healthcare. So during the peak of COVID, we saw a huge uptick in sales. Worked with like Mount Sinai, which is the largest health system in New York City. Being able to provide telehealth for family members to be able to like dial in and even say a prayer before their loved ones were being operated on. So it was a great role, honestly, the best role of my career. And then towards the end of my tenure there, we were pivoting and building another robot. So in many ways, I think entrepreneurship had always sort of been on my mind. It was a natural next step, and if anything, I feel like I was a little too late to the game.
Okay.
And at that time, I had to do some soul searching, and I was like, okay, am I excited about working with the same team, building a whole new robot and like starting from zero? Or should I just take this energy and like build my own company? So I left on good terms, but I felt ready to kind of like venture out and do my own thing. And I
Okay.
wasn't like really stuck on robots, so I didn't leave and think that okay, I'm going to go and build my own robot company. I actually had a HR tech solution idea for a very long time. So I played around with that a little bit, and soon realized that I didn't really have the experience or the domain knowledge that was needed to go out and like build on this technology.
Okay.
And there are a few things that happened sort of one after the other, coincidences or whatever you want to call it. But I kept feeling drawn to the robotic space, and I finally took the plunge and I made the decision to start my own
Okay.
robotic startup.
Okay. Okay. Oh my gosh, that is such a fascinating story. So, this 4 years tenure that you had with the robotics startup, that was like which of the seven startups that you worked with?
It was the seventh one.
Oh, it was the seventh one. Okay, yeah, because after that, now you jumped into
Yeah.
entrepreneurship. Okay, so cool. So tell me more about. So you were already working in this robotic startup. Then you decided to go into your own entrepreneurial journey. How did you? And I know you kind of started getting drawn into the robotic space, but how did you kind of like crystallize the idea? Like, what did you want to build? And once you crystallized the idea, how did, like, do you have a co-founder? Like, how did you build the team? How did you kind of get started with that?
Yeah. That's a wonderful question, and I love kind of just looking back at that journey today. Back
How
then,
long ago was that, by the way?
so it was maybe 2 years ago.
Okay. Okay.
It was 2 years ago.
Okay.
So once I left the company, as I mentioned, I was interested in building out this HR tech solution. And I'm like, okay, maybe I should do some
Mm-hmm.
consulting and like talk to HR companies. And like
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's how I build out my domain knowledge. So I started having conversations. I did a little bit of consulting for these two companies. One was in the ed tech space, the other one was on the HR tech space, and they were looking for a co founder as well. But I kept thinking about robots and talking about the crystallizing that idea. So where I ended up with robots was
Mm-hmm.
as great as the journey was with my previous company. Fundraising was had been a challenge for the company. So despite the fact that we had all this traction and we were profitable, we had the revenue, and it was because people were really burnt with hardware in the past. A lot of robotic
Mm-hmm.
companies were failing,
Mm-hmm.
and the thing is, building a robot is incredibly hard. Building a good robot is even harder,
Okay.
right? And in many ways, at that time, my gut feeling was that robots or any sort of hardware follows the same trajectory or like product life cycle as a consumer electronics.
Mm.
So what ends up happening is, kind of like your television, for example, right? As the technology improves, the price comes down. So if you don't have the volume, or you are not smart enough to identify building a solution or an ecosystem around what you're selling, you
Mm-hmm.
really won't be able to sustain
Mm-hmm.
growth.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an idea. I mean, again, I would network a lot. Like every Thursday for 2 hours, I would like be on LinkedIn diligently sending
Mm-hmm.
messages to anybody and everybody in the
Mm-hmm.
in the robotic space, and like try to get at least one call with someone in the
Mm-hmm.
industry, because I feel like this
Mm-hmm.
is such a great way to learn, right?
Yeah.
Like I think it's,
Yeah.
for me personally, I like feel like I learn better when I talk to people. Like, are you
Yeah.
facing the same challenges? So that
Yeah.
was an idea that had stuck around, that there would be a player that would
Mm-hmm.
come and sort of build this modularity. So there would be a
Mm-hmm.
base robot, and
Mm-hmm.
then there would be these modules that you could pick and choose, and whatever you wanted that robot to do
Mm-hmm.
would happen. Now it's remarkable because that's exactly what's happened today. Like 2 years later, you're
Mm-hmm.
seeing with Nvidia's platform this whole idea around shared intelligence, right? Like, so now if
Mm-hmm.
I'm building a robot and you're building a robot, we don't
Mm-hmm.
need to reinvent the wheel. And
Mm-hmm.
also simultaneously, a lot of like the technology, the lidar and the sensors, the cost of those have come down. So that was that always the gut feeling, and I felt like I needed to somehow insert myself into that space, and I wasn't quite sure how to do it. So I thought that consulting was probably the easiest way for me to do that. So I started reaching out to these global companies that were in the robotic space but didn't have a presence in the US, and they were looking to like expand in North America. And I made some amazing connections, some long-time friendships. I invited like these people from Asia to my Thanksgiving dinner with my family,
Okay.
and things were off to a great start.
And
I
this
was
was, you were still alone? Did you have a team around then,
I
or you
was
were just still
completely
alone?
one
Got it.
woman army.
Okay.
Um, and I was like, okay, like might as well work with like a mature product. These companies, and I was going after companies that had raised, $250 million, $500 million. So they were
Okay.
mature companies. They were just
Mm-hmm.
looking to expand into a new market, which I had done. So I was like, okay, can I sell my credibility here and like build these partnerships? And very coincidentally, around the same time, my co founder, who had actually been my distributor in a previous role, his wife ends up getting a job in Chicago. So he moves here and he reaches out to me and he's like, hey, like let's do a catch up call. So we end up having this very, like obviously romanticized conversation about robots and, our vision and where we see things headed. And we were talking about, essentially talking about the same thing. So we end the conversation, don't think anything about it. And then a
Mm-hmm.
week later, we both reached out to each other over text. And I'm like, why are we not doing this together? Like, we should
Okay.
totally join forces. So
Okay.
that that gave me a huge leg up because Rupesh, my partner, had built a really successful company called Artilligent in India. Now,
Mm.
if you or your listeners are familiar with India, India has an amazing services ecosystem. So being a value add. So now we kind of went from being resellers to now being value added resellers, where we could
Mm.
like not only sell robots, but we could like add solutions on top of that, because we had this, army of developers that we could like access. So it's amazing to kind of look back and see how that journey happened, and it's literally just one thing after the other. And in some ways I
Nice.
would say, you can always imagine what it's going to look like, when you set out to become an entrepreneur, but it always
Yeah.
heads in another direction.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's you just in some days it's just like, like one foot and then the next one, and
Yeah.
that's kind of how you set out on that journey. So
Okay.
that was amazing.
Wow, that is a pretty incredible story. Oh gosh, I have so many questions based on kind of what you said. So first thing you talked about, so Artilligent, is that is the same name of your current startup, right? So
Yeah,
you've
so we
maintained the
decided,
same.
yeah,
Okay.
we decided to start a new company, and we kind
Hmm.
of went back and forth on whether we should
Hmm.
have a different name for the company. But then we decided that there was so much like, branding built
But,
into
got
the
it.
the Indian
Okay.
company, so we are operating as two separate entities.
Got it.
However, so where we are today is we are a value added reseller in North America, but
Hmm.
we also have this relationship built in where, if you wanted to build custom robots, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but we've
Hmm.
had the good fortune of working with amazing companies like Coca-Cola, Nestle, Intel,
Hmm.
in the past few years, and that has
Hmm.
been possible because we have this lab and this army of developers that we work with.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. So just so that I understand, so your company builds robots, and then it also builds solutions and technologies can then just be used if another company has another robot. So they don't have to necessarily take the robot from you. They can if they want to, but they can also take this other piece of service or solution, and then they can just deploy it on their hardware. Is that what it is?
Correct, but in most cases, I mean, you can definitely decouple the solution from the robot. But in most cases, we offer it as a sort of package solution.
Package. Got it.
And
Okay.
and what's wonderful with all the solutions that we've built over a period
Mm-hmm.
of time is it's sort
Mm-hmm.
of kind of coming together organically into a
Mm-hmm.
sort of platform and this like
Mm-hmm.
robot interoperability space. But that's the
Mm-hmm.
big vision, I think.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the US entity goes, we're very
Mm-hmm.
much in that founder-led sales
Mode.
phase of the company.
Okay.
So, a lot of time was spent in that pre-go-to-market phase,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that we had those initial customers, that we had
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
the right materials, the content marketing, the demand gen piece, sort of building that out. And we're getting to that point where we're ready to go to the scaling growth piece, where we can like
Mm-hmm.
start hiring people, and all of
Mm-hmm.
the stuff has been figured out.
Okay, okay, fantastic, fantastic. And so the companies that you mentioned, Coca-Cola, Nestle, so what do the robots do? Like, do they help with manufacturing? Like, what does it do?
Yeah. So when we founded the company, one of the biggest use cases that
Mm-hmm.
India was working on at the time was at
Mm-hmm.
Bangalore International Airport. So we
Mm-hmm.
had partnered with a robotics company called Temi.
Mm-hmm.
And Temi is a personal AI assistant that can be customized. So sort of like an Android robot,
Mm-hmm.
which you can customize it for whatever. So the intended use case there was we had built a conversational AI tool on the robot, where a robot, so you're at the airport, and Bangalore International Airport is probably the size of a JFK. So it sees about 18 million passengers every year.
Mm-hmm.
And the robot would walk up to or just roam around,
Mm-hmm.
and you could approach the robot, or the robot would approach you, and you could ask it a question like, where's terminal 2, where's the
Mm-hmm.
nearest coffee shop,
Mm-hmm.
what documents do I need, like, so sort of like a FAQ for
Okay,
customers.
so like an assistant, I'm here in case you have any questions, and okay, got it. Okay,
Exactly. So
okay,
this is pre-Chat GPT, and it was
okay.
I mean, it was a pretty cutting edge tool. In fact, in our initial conversations, we even thought of taking that conversational AI piece and like building a product company based on that.
Got it. Okay.
And then ChatGPT came along, and that technology has improved so much. I mean,
Uh-huh.
you can just think about the complexities of conversations in an airport use case. So that ended up being a very successful pilot for the company, and it was highly visible. So we started getting noticed by um, these marketing agencies, like big names like Ogilvy and
Mm-hmm.
WPP. So
Mm-hmm.
WPP is, of course, the marketing agency, official marketing agency globally for Coca-Cola.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, the conversations were more about using the robot as an
Mm-hmm.
advertising platform, which I think is
Okay.
genius because you have such a captive audience in an airport.
Yeah.
Imagine, a
Yeah.
robot walking in with like a
Handing
advertising.
out cokes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So their initial pitch to us was, so beverages in general are always an impulse buy. Candy sort of falls in that same category. You don't typically make a trip to the supermarket to buy
Yeah. Yeah.
a Coke. So they were looking to increase the foot traffic in beverage aisles. So 30% or more of beverage purchases is an impulse buy. So they were interested in seeing if we could use the robots to increase foot traffic in the beverage aisles. And again, talking about, just timing and coincidences. So around the same time, Temi, this personal AI assistant, had come up with like a robotics platform, which was basically just a base. So it took care of all your core technology of like, navigation and obstacle avoidance. And we made a recommendation that we could build a robot to look like a Coke bottle, which would carry Coke and go around the supermarket. So not only would we do advertising of the beverage of the product, but we
Mm-hmm.
would bring the beverage to the customer.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very well received. And
So is it live in supermarkets in the US? Because I don't think I have seen it.
no, so we actually launched it in UAE and India to begin with.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the greatest thing about this launch was we had the president and CFO of Coca Cola visit us in that supermarket in India.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of like PR and excitement around that. But
Mm-hmm.
keeping that aside, we saw a 22% uptick in sales within the first month.
Mm. Okay.
So that led to conversations around adding more
Mm-hmm.
robots. So they were launching Sprite Zero, they were
Mm.
launching Jack Daniels and Coke.
Mm.
So that kind of like,
That is such a fun use case. Like I would have never thought of that use case for a robot, but that is such a fun use case. Oh my gosh.
yeah. And what's amazing is, Komal, like so I had worked on a similar project with Volkswagen in my
Hmm.
previous role, where we had built a custom robot for them. And this was a Make a Wish Foundation type of use case where
Mm-hmm.
um, the robot would walk on the soccer field, and you would have kids that were recovering in hospitals dialing into the robot and walking the soccer field with their
Oh
favorite
my
players.
God. Oh my God.
But so this sort of squarely falls in that experiential marketing
Marketing. Okay.
space.
Okay.
Um, but what's incredible is we were able to build some of these robots in 15 days at a fraction of the cost.
Okay. Is
So
it because of the team in India that
it's
got it?
because we
Mm-hmm.
we used 3D printing for rapid prototyping.
Mm-hmm.
It's because of the efficiency of our team. But the
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing, and again, sort of going back to what the gut feeling was, is you don't need to reinvent the wheel. A lot of like the
Correct.
cost goes into like building the robotics aspect, which was now
Mm-hmm.
just a platform off the shelf that we were purchasing.
Nice.
And that sort of led to this idea of like, okay, why don't we just start going out there and working with companies that are looking to create prototypes of
Hmm.
robots, but don't want to spend millions of dollars? How do we
Hmm.
start like approaching them? So that's how it came along. And then
Got
we
it.
had Intel. So we worked with Intel and DHL since then.
Mm-hmm.
So Intel has one store in California,
Mm-hmm.
and the robot sort of makes, so it's similar to like the Bangalore International Airport use case. And then DHL was working with a sort of warehouse delivery robot, but they
Mhm.
wanted a robot with angle shelves, which was absolutely easy to do given our
Nice.
partnership and given access to this platform.
Nice, nice. Okay, that is super exciting. I the experiential use case is super fun actually. I never thought like robot could be used for that, but that is so fun. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. All right. So now all of this requires money, right? Funding. And you talked about like in your previous startup, like how they struggled with funding. So I guess kind of the question is twofold. One is when you decided to jump in full time in the beginning, like you mentioned, you never had a team, you didn't have a co-founder, it was a one-woman army and kind of figuring things out. What was the decision like for you from a financial standpoint? Because a lot of business owners struggle with that when they want to jump in full time. How do you make that happen? And number two is this company, like how are you funding it? What does that process like? Have you raised any outside capital? How are you operating?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. So when I left, I did have a significant amount of savings,
Hmm.
and that probably also led to me taking that step. Um, I did make that money, the boring old fashioned way. I worked a very very long time, almost over 15 years,
Hmm.
and so I had some savings set aside. But at the same time, I think having worked for so many early stage startups, I knew how to run a lean team. I knew exactly where to spend money. So most of the money in the beginning was really spent on subscriptions, like having a CRM and
Hmm.
on like sales stack and tools.
Hmm.
Um, and it really wasn't a very expensive venture. So I was kind of betting on myself. Of course, I was, I would say like the only thing that I had to kind of keep in mind, and even today, as I kind of struggle with it, is when you go from working, and I'm sure you've probably had similar experiences, when you go from working for someone else and making a good salary,
Yeah.
you somehow, when you venture into entrepreneurship, you somehow always that not having that salary is always the void.
Hmm.
And so there was discomfort around that, but I had a significant amount of savings to be able
Hmm.
to like buy a few demo robots and like partner
Hmm.
with the companies that I was partnering with and go out, go to events.
Hmm.
But I've done a good job with like staying lean, and then whatever
Hmm.
robots and projects that we've sold, that money goes back into the business.
Business. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
As far as raising funds goes, so we originally had thought that we would take the conversational AI tool
Hmm.
and raise money on that. But then
Hmm.
ChatGPT sort of came out in a really big way, and it didn't really
Hmm.
make sense to go down that path. So we
Hmm.
haven't like really raised any funds. Our
Hmm.
plan is to do that. So we're at sort of an interesting crossroad today
Hmm.
where we have the robotics lab, we have the value added reseller piece, but the big vision here is as the world has more adoption of like robots,
Hmm.
it's going to become important for these robots to sort of talk to each other. So we
Hmm.
really want to position ourselves in that robot interoperability space.
Okay.
Also, with DHL, we're having conversations about hopefully commercializing some of these robots, which would be really good from a
Nice.
fundraising perspective.
Nice. Okay.
Investors usually shy away from anything that's bespoke.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Nice.
but we're doing a good job with like kind of reselling robots, using that
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
fund our
Yeah.
efforts.
Yeah, yeah, it was funny because the other day, like I came across this article on LinkedIn, or not article, like a post by someone, and it talked about how um, there's almost like this rewriting of fundraising rules. There is like no longer the need for raising huge rounds. Companies are choosing to be bootstrapped for as long as they can, and even when they're raising, it's a small amount because of like now like AI makes it so easy to kind of build products, build prototypes, start generating revenue. So it's yeah, it's totally cool. Like you guys are thinking along the same lines. So tell me about So I think, like, when you start a business, at least, to me, there are a few things that you kind of have to figure out, right? One is, how are you going to sustain yourself? So to your point, like, you make money the old fashioned way, save it, and then take the leap, which is exactly what I did. And then how do you come up with the quick prototype? So it looks like, you guys kind of have that figured out. How do you get your customers? So I know, like, you had this kind of pilot or a robot already at Bangalore International Airport. So you got a lot of feedback. Someone noticed you there. So that led to your second, engagement with Coke. But how do you go about kind of getting customers? What is that process like for you? How do you tackle that?
Yeah. So there are three different ways that we're going after customers. One
Mm-hmm.
is, and again, I really want to sort of, you know, talk about like just the ecosystem that exists in India today. There is a huge interest from digital transformation leaders and like CEOs and presidents to go to India and figure out what's really happening there. I think we have like a really good manufacturing ecosystem there as well. So there are those companies where we've made contact with them or sold them a robot in India, and
Mm-hmm.
those same companies are coming to us here as well. Or we're using those contacts to make connections here in the US because these are all Fortune 100 companies. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one channel.
Mm-hmm.
The second channel is just spending a lot of time on LinkedIn, using my network, using people that I've like talked to before, reaching out to them. And then the third piece is, the traditional, just acquiring a list, and doing cold outreach. I would say that I've not had the most success with that because it typically takes about 8 to 16 touch points to be able
Mm-hmm.
to get a sometimes even get one response.
Mm-hmm.
So I am sort of gravitating towards spending more time in sales because as we hire more people, I want to make sure that that piece
Mm-hmm.
is figured out. We have a system in place before I
Mm-hmm.
hire, make an expensive hire and then have them figure it out.
Okay.
But so far, I would say, just our network in LinkedIn has been how I have like reached out to customers.
Okay. Okay. And so you mentioned, like, you primarily own sales, or do you wear other hats also in your role right now?
So yeah, I'm doing a lot of like evangelism right
Okay.
now and mostly focused on the revenue side of things and of
Okay.
course, coordinating with our technical team. But it's really
Okay.
been a blessing to sort of inherit an entire team. So in some ways, like uh, I'm the co-founder, but I also inherited this wonderful team that knows what they're doing and is
Nice.
extremely capable.
Okay. Okay. So tell me maybe like two or three things that you like about building your own startup now versus working for a startup previously where you were successful, and three things that you don't like, which you.
So I think, I mean, of course, in the last 2 years, there have been ups and downs. As I mentioned to you earlier, we were very
Mhm,
focused on the conversational AI tool, and we did spend a lot
mhm,
of time, almost
mhm,
3 months, like perfecting our pitch on the conversational AI side, and then we decided to completely ditch that effort and pivot
mhm.
into a different
How
direction.
was that process like? Because pivoting again is not an easy thing to do. Like, there's a lot of advice on how you should pivot. And it's like for you, I guess, it was more clear, right? Like, oh, this is not the way to go now because of ChatGPT. But for a lot of other companies, it's not clear on how to pivot and when to pivot and how to successfully pivot. So any advice for our audience on that?
Yeah, I would say I think pivoting for us was really identifying, okay, do we even have the funds to keep going without fundraising?
Mm,
So that was the pivot
okay.
in all honesty, because we still continue selling conversational AI, but we weren't confident at the time that being a value added reseller would
Mm,
find excitement or having like these bespoke projects that we'd worked on. And that is the space that I am obviously, like I think a big goal for me this year is to like identify how do we go and raise funds, because to scale and to do this in a speedy and efficient manner we do need more capital.
more
So we
capital. Okay.
either go ahead and like sell more robots, which we can absolutely do, or we raise funds. But then bringing on a strategic investor is very important. I think a year back I was like, okay, I need money and I don't care where it comes from. Today, I feel a little differently about it because we have the funds and we're able to resell
Yeah.
robots and put that back into the business.
Yeah.
I'm looking for strategic partnerships and someone who knows the robotic space really well and knows which of these
Nice.
three areas we should be focusing on. So coming back to your question, the three things that I like about um, building a business, I feel like in some ways it's truly a personal journey. Like you learn so much about yourself. I have learned so much about myself, uh, despite the fact that I've worked for, I had that entrepreneurial germ, and that's why I work for startups. But I feel like you learn a lot about yourself. So I've learned what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are, what I need to work on, and in some ways, I feel like I've really enjoyed that journey. The reason I've always felt drawn to working for startups and now starting my own company is I like building something tangible and it's the pride to look back at something and say, we built this together is really exciting to me versus working for a company where, you probably play a smaller part.
Correct.
Um, and then the third thing is, I would say my ask has gotten stronger. So, I've always been a big believer in networking, and I've been to all the DC tech meetups, and like for a very, very long time, like nothing really came of it. And now
Uh-huh.
suddenly, like I'm seeing like every meetup, every conversation leads to something.
Something.
And
Yeah.
the difference is because I have a better ask now.
Nice, nice. Okay, fantastic, fantastic. Okay, this is such a good conversation, Ujjwala. I think I can keep going on, but being mindful of time. I guess kind of the last question would be, you mentioned like how this has been a personal journey for you and how you have learned so much about yourself. So, what is one thing that you're able to share with the audience where you have changed as a person from working a job to now building and running your own business?
So I would say, the three things that I always stay focused on, and this is kind of like my personal system, if you want to call it. You need three things to keep going every day, every week, year over year. And the beauty of this journey is the longer you can stay in the game, the more the
Oh
positive
my gosh, a hundred
factors,
percent, a hundred
the,
percent. Yeah.
right? The more the positive factors compound in your favor.
Yes, yes. Entrepreneurship is all about just persistent and just staying the course because a lot of times people get off the course when it's about to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the three things that I focus on is momentum, right? Like basic sales advice, make sure your calendar is full, lead generation, talking to a lot of people. Every conversation energizes you and kind of leads you to like putting in more effort. The second is network. So you have to build the network, which is you need to have an organic network where you can go and find customers. So you're talking about the conferences we've been to or going to is
Yeah,
an example of that. You and I having a conversation where we're sort of in similar stages and like,
yeah.
picking up ideas from each other. But then also, I think a big focus for me this year is building a network of people that have already done what I'm looking to do. So that's the network. I want to hang out with people that have sold their companies for $100 million, that have,
Yeah,
unicorn startups. I want to be their friends. So
yeah,
I'm really focusing on that. And then the third piece, which is going back to your previous question about, what's so great about like working for someone else versus yourself. I think there are systems in place. Even if you're not feeling motivated, especially at this early stage, right?
yeah,
You have to build strict systems for yourself. So I've been
yeah.
rereading Atomic Habits, and that's like really, really been a helpful thing for me. So I would say
Yeah,
momentum, network, and systems.
yeah,
And hopefully, if I'm disciplined enough, once we start hiring and
yeah,
putting together a team,
yeah,
we're able
yeah,
to launch
yeah.
the systems for others as well.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, this like, hits like such a chord with me because it's funny, like entrepreneurship or building anything, it's like so non-glamorous. It's all just about showing up every day despite how you feel, and just running the course, like just having that enough stamina to run the course. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe, we're 45 minutes into this conversation. I have really enjoyed this, Ujjwala. Thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your story. I am inspired, so I'm sure our audience is going to find this very inspiring. You are amazing, and I'm sure you're going to accomplish amazing things. So
Well,
thank you
thank
for
you.
giving us
And
a
you as
chance
well. You as
to,
well.
speak. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Komal.
Oh, by the way, before you head out, where can our audience find you?
So find me on LinkedIn. I'm very, very active.
Hmm.
Just search for Ujjwala Kashkari. I'm the only Ujjwala Kashkari in the world, so I promise you, you'll find me very easily.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Ujwala. Thank you again.
Thanks.